that. So my name's Chris McEleny's. I'm here in behalf of the Alba party. I'm the General Secretary. I was actually here a few months ago. We had a national council in this room, but now that I'm the General Secretary, they don't tend to let me out to speak and voice my own opinions, something that if you're in the Labour Party front bench apparently gets you sacked if you, as I kick the stage down. But lo and behold, they sent me along today, so you'll get some of my own opinions. But the last time I actually spoke in this venue was in 2016 when I stood for Deputy Leader of the Scottish National Party. Now that certainly feels like a generation ago. But as I look around this room, it seems that some things don't change. I think I'm still the youngest person in the room. I do see Marjorie at the front here who might run for my money. I'm 65. Well, you don't look a day over 35. So one of the first points I wanted to make was I was asked to speak on a specific topic. That's, the best route to independence is using a plebiscitary election. Plebiscite, you ask most people in the general population, they won't understand what that means. So I think that's kind of key, that we need to understand that the phrases, the terminology, the theories, the routes to independence that we might think, are common nature to us aren't common nature to the wider public. And I don't particularly think that a plebiscite is the best and only route to independence. I think it's one of a whole raft of routes to independence. And the reality is, Scotland will become an independent country when we build a broad coalition of fellow Scots across Scotland, and we build a majority of people that believe Scotland should be an independent country. So whether it's utilising the historic claim of right, whether it's a plebiscitary election, or whether it's a referendum or any other peaceful democratic means, the whole point of legal theory is so that there are political routes that can be followed so that we can build that coalition behind them. But throughout history, political reality has trumped legal theory every single time. If it was as simple as producing a piece of paper showing legal theory, then there would be a Stuart on the throne of the United Kingdom. But the political reality of the day was that they didn't want the Stuarts on the throne of the United Kingdom. They wanted to invite, foreign usurpers to the United Kingdom to take the throne. So that's the point. When we hear good legal theories, without building a grassroots organisation, a campaign of women and children and men and trade unionists, retirees, young people, students, and everybody from every cross-section of society in Scotland behind that as a legitimate means to democratically exercise our claim of right, to democratically exercise our sovereignty, we won't get past the first hurdle. So the referendum policy, it's actually 1999 that Alex Salmond introduced the referendum policy to the SNP. And I think the plebiscitary election route was SNP policy from around 1938. So, this is nothing new, for the almost the overwhelming majority of the party of government's history. Using an election was the route to independence. And of course, there is debate over whether Margaret Thatcher, of course, said herself or not that. Do we have a microphone now? This is, I often find this really difficult now to moderate the voice level for a microphone. So we've all seen that graphic when Mrs. Thatcher said, if the people of Scotland want to be independent, the way they do that is, a majority of MPs elected at an election. That was pretty much all grown up. My dad used to say to me when we tuned into teletext watching the election results come in, and he would say to me, look, this is before revolution, of course, I'm old enough for that. The reality is that, we're never going to get independence because, maybe we won 5 seats in 1997, I think, or 4, 6. We're never going to get it because we're never going to win a majority of seats in Westminster. And, my entire, childhood growing up, that was, the accepted fait accompli that the Scottish National Party wanted their independence. Then if they delivered a majority of the Scottish seats at Westminster, that was a mandate for their independence. And we've conceded the argument that that's no longer the case because we've won not 1, not 2, but 3 majorities of the seats in the Westminster election. And we've conceded the principle that somehow, even though that's an election on reserved matters, and we're told, of course, that, the Constitution is a reserved matter, we've conceded the point that by winning a majority of seats in an election to the UK Parliament, somehow that doesn't count as a mandate to progress Scotland's claim of right and progress for independence. So that's a fatal flaw. Now, if I think back to when I stood for deputy leader of the SNP in 2016, but slightly after that, as my, very high popularity in the party started to decline, at the 2019 SNP conference, I proposed a debate on something called a Plan B. That was, Boris Johnson is this joker that's now our Prime Minister. There's not a chance in hell that he's going to concede to an independence referendum. He's never going to agree to a transfer of powers through a Section 30 order. And of course, a Section 30 order, an order of council in the United Kingdom, it's just a guise that the UK uses to hide that it's not actually a democracy. It's a guise to use the sovereign's power to transfer power to create legislation without going through the legislative framework of Parliament, to allow elected representatives of the people to actually determine what the legislation of the people for the people should be. So, it's not integral to our national cause. It was created by Salmond smartly in the age of devolution to unite the people of Scotland behind a common cause, a common purpose, to deliver something that was deliverable and achievable, and he delivered it and he achieved it. But delivering an independence referendum is not the raison d'etre of the Scottish National Party. It shouldn't be, and it should never be the raison d'etre of the Scottish independence movement. The raison d'etre is delivering and regaining Scotland's independence. And that in itself is the Westminster trap, when people think that, marching the troops up to the top of the hill, expending all our political capital, our resource and our time, is all about delivering a referendum, but it's about winning a referendum or whichever democratic test we utilise, which counts. And that's the point I made earlier about building that broad coalition. But, I don't think it's beneficial to always hark back to what should have been done and what we could have done, but it is sometimes important to understand where you came from, to understand how you get to where you want to go. So you think back to, that Plan B debate of 2019, and thank you for no one booing so far, particularly when I stood up on the stage. The point we were making was Johnson's never going to give us that Section 30 order. So, we're going to have a UK election coming up, and when that UK election comes up, we should be using that as that one final mandate to say that if Scotland returns a majority of seats in favour of independence, that's an undeniable, overwhelming, uncontested mandate that we should have a democratic choice on our future. And if you say no, Mr. Prime Minister, and you refuse to engage in the same terms that the Edinburgh Agreement set out in 2012 for the referendum of 2014, then the 2021 Scottish Parliament election, we will turn that into de facto referendum Scottish independence. Now, what you should have done was then built up a popular campaign behind legitimising that, so that people in Scotland says, well, that's kind of a point. I don't really like Nicola Sturgeon and I don't really like that SNP, but they've kind of got a point. I don't know if we should have another referendum, but, they asked at this hurdle, they won this election, they say they would deliver that. Maybe they've got a point, but instead, we wasted the 2019 election to give Boris Johnson the gift of a majority. We fought an election on stopping Brexit, something that the people of England voted for, as stupid as some people might think that was. It's a democratic entitlement to vote for what they want. And then we turned the 2021 Scottish Parliament election into another election to give us another mandate, for which we gained in the 2019 election, the 2017 election, and the 2016 election. So if the message in the penny wasn't dropping, that no matter how many mandates Scotland has, and no matter how many times we ask the same question, we're always going to get the same answer, I'm just puzzled as to why people across Scotland accept that this time it's going to be a different outcome. And it's important to reflect, some people say to me, oh, you'll be happy, Nicola Sturgeon, you get booed for proposing this and now they've adopted your idea. Well, they've not actually, because there's a very important difference. The first difference being I did not propose a majority of votes. I said a majority of the seats would be a mandate to independence negotiations, and I'll come back to that in a minute, why that's really important. The second was, I did not say use a Westminster election. That's their franchise, that's their park, their ball, their rules. I said use a Scottish Parliament election, a franchise we created in Scotland, voted for and endorsed by the Scottish Parliament. Why is that important? 16 and 17-year-olds, overwhelmingly in favour of Scottish independence, will be denied a vote in a de facto referendum using a general election. European nationals, 190,000 Polish people in Scotland that perhaps swayed towards the No campaign in 2014. Now they see the xenophobia of Brexit Britain. You know, you've got something like 240,000 potential yes voters will be denied a vote because in the franchise for a UK election, they're not entitled to a vote. It's a massive constituency of voters that we are denying ourselves. And of course, with there being a constituency election and a regional list election, you can also take personalities out of it. So that's a fundamental flaw. But the reason that it's a real flaw to say we should go into this fighting a plebiscitary election based on we need to win a majority of seats. And first, before I get to that, sorry, I should pick up on Gordon's point. He's absolutely right. You know, if I was First Minister, which I'm not, I would have copied what Alex Salmon done. You know, I would have put a Lord Advocate in place, and of course, without breaching the ministerial code, I would have had a good idea on whether or not they thought the Scottish Parliament had the competence to hold an independence referendum. And at least if they didn't think it had the legal competence, I'd ask them at least, are you willing to make sure it's a stateable case so we can put it through Parliament? You should have put the legislation through your Scottish Parliament. You should have announced the date of the referendum. And if the UK government wanted to challenge that, they should have challenged that in the highest court of the land. And the highest court in this land is the Court of Session in Scotland, not the Supreme Court in London. You know, and at that Court of Session, you know, these people take law seriously. You know, and if the Scottish Parliament voted for, by an overwhelming majority, a policy proposition to have an advisory referendum, because that's what it is, the same as 2014, how can anyone say that, you know, no, you don't have the legal imperative, you don't have the moral authority, you don't have the political mandate to do something you did in 2014 with less votes behind it than you do now? You know, there is a chance that Scottish Court of Session may have said, well, yeah, that we think that is within the competency of the Scottish Parliament. And then the Scottish Government could have proceeded until UK law officers then referred the Court of Session to the Supreme Court. A completely different situation, because at that point we would have had a Parliament elected by Scots, made up of Scots, saying that there's a democratic mandate to hold a referendum on Scottish independence. It would have been voted for, and it went to our highest court in this land, and they'd have said that's absolutely fair, that's fair cricket, as they would say in England. And then a UK Supreme Court just based across the street from the London House of Parliament would be telling us that your Scottish court and your Scottish judiciary doesn't know what it's talking about, your parliamentarian's opinion doesn't account for Jack Diddley's shit, you're not having a referendum. That would be a completely different situation that would G up people behind a campaign, as opposed to we're not quite sure if we've got the ability to hold this referendum. Could you maybe have a wee look at it and let us know? Now, I hope the UK Supreme Court. I want Scotland to be an independent country yesterday. I genuinely hope the UK Supreme Court says, yeah, the Scottish Parliament does have the competencies to do that. But, you know, political reality, legal theory, you know, this will be a situation that political reality and legal theory come hand in hand, because the UK Supreme Court will relish the opportunity to put the Scottish Parliament back in its box. And they can do it with two ways. First, they can just take the mick out of us by saying, you're a wee bit, you know, as the Scottish Government successfully argued themselves when they ridiculously threw money against the Martin Keating's case. You know, they might say, well, actually, you've not actually put a bill forward. So you're asking us to think on a hypothetical situation. Away you go, have a wee holiday and come back again once you actually put your bill forward. Then we'll go and put our bill forward and go back and we'll be into the same situation in which they'll say, no, you don't have the legal competence. You know, and my final point on this, you know, ridiculously dangerous strategy the UK Supreme Court is, you know, I can't imagine a situation that if the SNP I used to be a member of in the lead up to the 2012 Edinburgh Agreement found itself in a sticky wicket, that it would end up in court. You know, you would finally, after, you know, decades of struggle of being, you know, discriminated in your workplace, you know, we end up with a nationalist government. I can't imagine a situation with a nationalist government going to court. We would need to send, you know, our party lawyers in to argue a different proposition from our government chief legal officer. It's absurd. It's totally absurd. And I really do hope it doesn't undermine the cause of independence going forward, because even Donald Dewar agreed as part of Alex Salmon signing up to the Yes Yes campaign in 1997, because there was don't forget there was a bit of controversy about that. A lot of people in the nationalist movement thought that devolution would be a millstone around our neck that would stop us becoming independent. They didn't want us to sign up for that. It was independence or nothing. And part of that deal was Gordon Dewar said that the Scottish Parliament, there shall be no impediment and no barrier to the Scottish Parliament, having a referendum if that's what the people of Scotland want. But what we potentially are thrown away here is a precedent set that took decades upon decades of blood in people's feet, from walking up and doing high closes, not through any other means. It took decades for us to get to where we got to. And the UK government can now turn round at the end of this year, as close as that, and say, well, you said you would respect the rule of law. And the rule of law says it's unlawful for you to have a referendum. And then you jump into your de facto referendum campaign and say, well, actually, we're not listening to that anymore. And you've conceded that the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the right to hold an independence referendum. So forevermore, whether it's Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Michael Gove, who knows? They just need to say Scottish Government versus UK Supreme Court judgment. There you go. That's it. It's an act of folly. So that takes us back to, it's more than likely we're going to end up in this election campaign. And we're going to turn that, and I say we, the Scottish Government, who, whether you like it or not, they are the main principal advocates of the independence campaign, because it's their ball in terms of taking us to the Supreme Court, what they want to turn the next election into. So if they want to proceed with turning that election into a de facto referendum, I've already highlighted, two big flaws. One being the franchise, which stops a lot of people that probably would vote for independence now getting a vote. European nationals, 16 and 17-year-olds. The second fundamental flaw that nobody seems to talk about is, does anyone in here know when the next UK general election will be? No, apparently the UK Prime Minister decides that. So that's a fundamental flaw, because we have the troops halfway up the hill until the end of 2023. Will it be the spring of 2024? Will it be the autumn of 2024? Will it even be January 2025, which is technically as late as I can hold it? How very difficult it will be to build a real groundswell of opinion, knocking doors, asking people to campaign and come and help deliver independence. And when they ask you, when's the vote? You say, we don't know, it's up to them to decide. It's just not credible. But if it is to happen, you simply cannot allow the cause of Scottish independence to be about one political party. In 2014, when people went to the ballot paper, they could have really disliked me and Gourock, and trust me, a lot of them really disliked me and Gourock, but they could have still voted yes for independence, because it had nothing to do with me or Alex Salmond, as much as they try to say it did. It had nothing to do with Nicola Sturgeon. It had nothing to do with, a policy decision. It was, should Scotland be an independent country? Yes or no. But in a general election, you go to your ballot paper, it'll be a very long list of people's names and different political parties. So let's just say you live in Arran and you just have a wee bit of an issue that ferries don't come in and out of the island too often. Is there a risk that you'll not give the SNP a vote because, well, that's really the big issue for you on that Thursday? I might like independence, like the idea of it, but to be honest, I had to shut down my bed and breakfast because I can't get these bloody ferries in it. Or if you live in Port Glasgow, you might have a similar issue. Or tragically, if you come to Dundee, you might think there's a bad record at the moment on drugs. Or if you get the trains. And I'm not going to go on and on, because you could go on and on at the moment on domestic policy. You can't allow the cause of Scottish independence to be bogged down on bad administration. You just cannot allow that to happen. The second issue is party political. I would have probably been a Labour Party member if I was born in 1940. 1950, 1960. A lot of people where I come from are still Labour Party members. They still vote for the Labour Party. They might get trounced at the election, but they get trounced by winning, some 600, 700,000 votes. And there are even Conservatives in Scotland, as much as people try to tell us there are not. Now, if you put a ballot paper in front of them, and somebody's been a Labour man all these days, and you say to them, you need to vote SNP in this election because it's not about education or health or Trident or anything, it's about independence. Some of these people say, well, I cannot hold my nose and vote for that party, because we all know that party politics is one of the most tribal things in life. So if you make it about tribal politics, you'll get a tribal result. And, you know, we might win a majority of the seats, we might win all 59 of the seats. But if we said the bar was 50% of the vote, and you win 59% of the seats with 46 or 42 or 44% of the vote, the UK government turns around and says, no, you said yourself it was a majority of the votes, you've now had your referendum. How do you then deliver another referendum after that? And of course, you know, there's the practical issue in election that, believe it or not, some people still retain a personal vote. You know, you think of Pete Wishart, for example, in Perth. You know, there's an abundance of people vote for him because how much they like him. You know, maybe he's done them a good turn. So in a general election, there will be people that go and vote because they like, you know, when my man died, you know, I had an issue getting the pension and they sorted it. I'm going to give him a vote. They won't care about the, you know, what does that vote actually get counted for? So, unless that election is turned into Scotland United, you're never going to unite the Scottish independence movement behind a single candidate, and that's what it must be. Whether they're an SNP member, an Alba member, a Green, somebody of no political background, a personality, someone from the world of sport, someone from the world of television, the independence movement has to get together and it has to understand that unless we unite and fight that plebiscitary election as Scotland United, with a single candidate on that ballot, but you know when you go to vote for them, it's not about being bogged down by the administration errors at Holyrood. You know it's not about, you know, I don't really like some of these social issues that they're progressing at the moment. I don't really like their position on tax. You know you're voting for Scotland. You know you're voting for Scottish independence. So if the Scottish Government want to proceed foolishly to use the next UK election as that de facto referendum, then they need to open up their hands of friendship to the political parties that support Scottish independence, the Scottish political independence movement, and they need to decide and agree that we will stand in this election together to deliver our independence. Thank you.